Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of the shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, whenever and wherever you are listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This conversation was recorded on May 20th, 2021. Today, I welcome returning guest Charlie Robinson back to the program to discuss his latest book, The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire, co-authored with Jeff Berwick. This follow-up to The Octopus of Global Control uses the metaphor of building demolition to describe how those seeking to implement a globalist agenda have slowly eroded the foundations of the American state. He posits that this will inevitably lead to the demise of the United States as a leading power. Not only that, Charlie believes that this is being done purposely in order to replace U.S. dominance with a new order of internationalism based largely on the concept of the Great Reset promoted by the World Economic Forum. This interview makes for a great follow-up to episode 79, where I discuss the idea of communitarianism with activist Nikki Rapana. Clearly, the old world notions of a society built upon the concepts of individual rights and the freedoms to make personal choices conflict with the communitarian ideals that dominate the discourse surrounding the Great Reset. By destroying the empire, globalists have an opportunity to defeat whatever vestiges of a constitutional government with a clearly defined Bill of Rights remains. Using the problem-reaction-solution model, the Great Reset can save the day by rebuilding American life upon the ashes of destruction. Robinson and Berwick take the reader through the process of demolition, starting with the foundation and ending with clearing the debris. They detail the path of collapse from a variety of angles. The degradation of education, mainstream media, and wealth equality are just a few examples of the many aspects of American society that are under attack. Special emphasis is placed on the power of the U.S. dollar and its position as the world reserve currency. A collapse of the dollar and the resulting hyperinflation could well be the trigger that sets off the cascade of events which will leave the empire in ruin. Time is also dedicated to point out the many corporations, foundations, and billionaire stakeholders involved in pulling the pin. Find out more about the work of Charlie Robinson, purchase the books, or check out his podcast, Macroaggressions, at www.theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. Please like, subscribe, and share this interview throughout your social media networks. We rely on listeners like you to distribute this information. If you want to find out more about The Shift and other podcasts produced out of Doug McKenty Studios, go to www.theshiftnow.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter, subscribe for feature-length versions of the podcast, and listen to hours of available free content. You can also find me at Doug McKenty on Facebook, at DMcKenty on Twitter, or at The Shift with Doug McKenty on YouTube, Odyssey, Gab, MeWe, and Telegram. I want to thank Charlie for returning to the program, and thank you for helping to make the shift. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this, the 80th episode of The Shift. My guest today is author Charlie Robinson. I had him on just a few weeks ago to have a discussion about his last book, The Octopus of Global Control, but he has come out with a book recently co-authored with Jeff Berwick of The Dollar Vigilante. And this one is called The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. And after our last conversation, I thought it'd be a good idea to go ahead and have him on again so that we can have a conversation about this recent book and get a little bit deeper into exactly what he's talking about here. How are you doing, Charlie? Thanks for coming on again.
I'm really good. I'm glad to be back with you. I think our last conversation, we could have just kept going and going, but we had to cut it off at some point. So maybe we'll pick up sort of where we left off, because, you know, the first book, The Octopus, deals with control structures and things like that. And then as I started to promote and I was going around and doing podcasts. I went on Berwick's podcast, The Anarchast. And when we got done recording, we just chit-chatted afterwards. And he said, he made a comment to me. He said, it's all coming down. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm open, but tell me more. He's like, the system. The banking system is a house of cards. The government is propped up by that. It all seems so solid, but it feels like it's all just about to come down. And I was like, yeah, man, I can go with you on that, and we kept talking a little bit more. And he said, would you want to work on something together? And I said, yeah, of course. You'd like a book or something? He said, yeah. He says, I've always wanted to put out a book. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll send you some ideas and you let me know what you think. So he sent me some ideas, and I liked his ideas. And of course, I like Jeff too. So I like, when you get a Canadian anarchist who lives in Mexico, that person is going to see the world from a totally different angle than most people. And I love that about Jeff. So he sent me his ideas, and I looked at it and I liked them, but I could not shake that comment that he made to me that it's all coming down. So, because in my head, I'm thinking like a building, like a controlled demolition.
Right.
And so I said, what if, so I wrote back and I said, I got an idea. What if we made, how we talked about it all coming down? What if we made the parallels, use the metaphor of like the way you would take a building down? You have a rotting foundation, or, pre-weakening of the building, identifying the support columns, rigging the detonators, pushing down the plunger, and clearing the debris. What if we did it like that? And I put this like 3-page sort of outline like that, and I sent it over to him. And in typical Jeff fashion, I got an email back, goes, I like your idea better. That was it. And then we're off and running. So, right. So that's how the book kind of came about. And that started in the summer of 2018. I was in Costa Rica, and I started on it. I started on the framework of what would become this book, and sent it, periodic. I'd send it over to Jeff, and I'd say, this is what I'm working on. I'm working on these big blocks here. And he would say, okay, I'm working on this. And so we did this for a while, but he's super busy, and he's got Dollar Vigilante that he's running. He's also running in Acapulco, the largest anarchist conference in the world that happens in Acapulco, Mexico in February. And so he's got a lot on his plate. And I just kept writing. But we got to a point where I wanted, in my mind, it would be great if we launched this book at an Acapulco 2020, because it was pretty close to being done. And I thought we could get it done. It'd be a bit of a rush towards the end, but it was doable if Jeff got me the last parts that he needed, that I needed. And he just couldn't do it. There's so much going on. So we didn't release it at an Acapulco February 2020. And I'm glad we didn't. Because even though in my mind it was a great opportunity to do it at his conference, it wasn't ready. And 3 weeks after that conference, COVID kicked off. Yeah. And I was like, and then I sent him a message and I said, I think we should just kind of hang out and watch this for a couple months and see where this thing goes. And so he said, yeah, let's do that. So we put the writing on hold for a couple of months. And then in about August of 2020, I said, I've seen enough, Jeff. What about you? He said, yeah, me too. So we rewrote, we wrote a huge COVID section. And then I had to go back through the book and sort of, because I had started it in 2018 and change some of the verb tense, because the things that I was talking about in 2018 about, in the future, we may see this. Right. I had to go back and say, like, put it in the past tense and be like, last year we saw this, it already happened. And so on the one hand, I was, we were over the target. We were getting a lot of this stuff right, but it had been, from the time we started the book to the time we were going to release it, had been like 2 years. And so you kind of had to make sure it was all updated. And then we just kind of weaved the Corona narrative through the whole thing and released it on the Friday before the election. So it was like first part of November. And on election day, on that Tuesday election day, it became a #1 bestseller in the US and in Australia. And the irony is that if you read the book, you'll never vote again, and
Yeah.
have that happen on election day. We just thought that was the funniest thing ever. And of course, Jeff spent. We released it on that Friday, and Jeff spent that Friday night in jail in Cabo for yelling at a cop. So I was like, this is all just so perfect. This is exactly how I envisioned the book going. Jeff in jail, us releasing it worldwide, and it becoming a #1 bestseller. And he's still, he's out of jail. He's sobered up. He's out of jail, right? After
Right.
a day or two, a day later, and it just was so. It just turned out to be so fitting. And of course, had we put it out in February, it would have been the most irrelevant book ever. But because you're going, hey, listen, this thing is all coming down, and let me explain why. And people are going, yeah, maybe I get it. But after the COVID situation, we were then laying out the idea, and we're saying, take a look at this, it's all coming down, and everyone was going, oh yeah, oh, it's definitely coming down. So
Yeah.
the timing was something that we just kind of got lucky on, but I think in the end it made a huge difference.
Well, it was the perfect conclusion for the book, actually, because everything that you were describing in the first 2/3 or so, 3/4 of the book, it all comes to fruition with the coronavirus pandemic, and exactly how the demolition is happening, and we're witnessing it in real time. It's not just speculation. I mean, it's becoming pretty obvious.
Yeah, and we didn't predict that or anything. I mean, just to be clear,
Right.
we knew something would be the trigger. I actually did my presentation at Anarchapulco where I explained what was coming in the book. I listed that the trigger would be Deutsche Bank. Actually, I thought that Deutsche Bank would be
Right.
because it's like a zombie bank. It's totally insolvent. And I thought, oh well, this is definitely going to be the weak link here that's going to implode. And then because of all the derivatives that are sort of interconnected between all these banks, it's going to pull everyone down in the banking system, and then that's going to be the trigger. And though that is a logical and reasonable assumption, I had no idea that there would be a virus. And once that virus situation got sort of unleashed, I was like, oh, this is so important for us to mention, and so crucial. So though we got quite a bit of it right in the book, I have to admit that we did not predict the corona situation. We were not proactive in predicting that. We were just more reactive in explaining it. And then of course taking that and extrapolating where it will go in the future. That we were able to do. But the idea that we guessed and guessed on a virus, that didn't happen. We're not that good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually took a lot of us by surprise, even though everyone kind of saw it coming, that there was something coming,
Yeah.
and it makes perfect sense in hindsight. But I mean, I remember when the 2 weeks to flatten the curve happened, and I thought, oh, I just thought it was another virus scare, just like SARS. I mean, another, kind of propaganda attempt to funnel a few more $1 billion to vaccine manufacturers, and then it would be out of the news cycle. I was blown away with what it's turned into.
Yeah.
So,
it's been a mess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to just talk about why. I guess I'll preface this. I just had a conversation with Nikki Rapina, who wrote the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto, and so she talks a lot about communitarianism, which I don't know how familiar you are with this, but it's kind of the underlying philosophy behind. They call it the third way. So they use the Hegelian dialectic. Communitarianism is theoretically, according to the upper classes, the synthesis of capitalism and Marxism, and it's this philosophy that's behind a lot of what's happening now. It's kind of the glue that you can weave through Agenda 21 and the World Economic Forum and a lot of these the concepts of technocracy. It's the kind of political philosophy that's been there in the background, but you got to dig to find it. Mm-hmm. But she mentioned that one of the things that we talked about was that the United States holds a particular hurdle for these globalists because of our Constitution, essentially, and the Declaration of Independence, and especially the Bill of Rights, which really clearly outlines individual rights, that it produces a border between where the government can go and what they can't do, and then the rights of individuals. And so you hear communitarians a lot, or people from this scene, they're promoting the idea of human rights as opposed to individual rights. And we, hear all this verbiage about how the Constitution is outdated. Those ideas of individual rights are harmful for the society at large, for the community. And we need to replace them with these ideas of these proactive human rights, where people have the right to an education, as opposed to the right to choose the education, or they have a right to health care, as opposed to the right to choose the kind of healthcare that they want. And so then when you approach the idea of rights from this angle, suddenly the governments and the corporations can infringe upon your individual rights, because hey, it's for the common good, right? It's for the community. We all need to get the vaccine, my gosh, and you don't have the right to say otherwise, because it's for the good of everyone. And so it provides this legal foundation. Anyway, to kind of make a long story a little shorter, the point was that the Bill of Rights really set up this great hurdle towards the endeavor of building this world government. And so I think that, and then I started reading your book and realizing, well, of course they have to target the United States. It's a really big threat to all of these plans for world governance that they have. And so by engaging in this controlled demolition, they're taking out this threat so that they can then move forward. And then the other thing that came to mind is a lot of what we've seen with the coronavirus, especially, is that the Chinese model is clearly the one that the upper classes are promoting now. I mean, we have the whole thing where, oh, look they locked down so hard right away and they did such a great job. This is the message that we're all getting. If only we were more like China. We should have a social credit system too. We should have, more surveillance going on so that we can react quicker to these things. Anyway, just a long way to phrase this question, but is that what you perceive as well? Is that why the United States is being targeted for this demolition? And what made you think to focus on the U.S. empire, and why are they taking out the U.S. empire specifically?
Yeah, it's because we are the biggest obstacle for this world government. And now we looked back on sort of similarities between the Soviet Union and the breakup of the Soviet Union. I mean, there are quite a few. It was dragged into an unwinnable war in Afghanistan for a decade. Now we've done that for 2 decades. They had their currency manipulated by external forces. That's of course happening to us. The politicians were stealing everything that they could get their hands on, and privatizing industries for their oligarch buddies. We saw that. Nobody trusted the media and Pravda. They knew that was propaganda, and so we see some of those same things being done to the American empire as well. And it is because, and to be clear, when the breakup of the Soviet Union didn't mean the end of Russia, it just meant the end of all the satellite nations in Eastern Europe that they had control of, and it meant it was more of a loss of their influence as well. So the breakup of the American empire is similar. It doesn't mean it's the end of the United States. It just means it's the end of this empire. So it's the end of the petrodollar arrangement and the SWIFT banking system and all of the 1,000 military bases around the world, and all of these privilege, these extra things that America has had because it's been the world's reserve currency, because we've had this really powerful military. But everything that we've been doing is totally unsustainable. We've been living beyond our means because of this arrangement, and not doing a very good job of being a very welcoming or nice force around the world. There are plenty of countries that would love to see us go away, and because of our behavior, kicking off these never-ending wars in the Middle East, and slapping sanctions on countries that don't do things our way, and then regime changing them and pretending like we don't do any of that, and then being on our high horse about, oh, how dare Iran start their nuclear program? They're going to kill us all. Meanwhile, just the hypocrisy is so staggering.
Right.
And everybody sort of notices this. And as we start to decline, it kind of, it's sort of like a picture of like when the bully gets bullied back and somebody stands up to him and punches him in the face, and then all the kids in class decide to stuff this guy in the locker because he deserves it.
Right.
That's what we are. Where America is going to be stuffed in the locker, and we deserve it because of our behavior. Not us personally, not the people, of course, but the government and the military and our foreign policy has been so. We've just been so destructive and shitty to so many people and countries around the world that there will come a day when we will get a taste of our own medicine. And you know what, it's not entirely the worst thing that could happen, because Jeff and I talk about how, this empire has to go away in order for their plans for a one world government to take hold. But there are components of this empire that should go away.
Yeah.
It's not to say that it's all, oh no, this is going to be the worst thing in the world. Like, it could be an opportunity for us to fix some of our flaws or to change our monetary policy and things like that. But it will be a massive change, and it will be felt by all Americans. And we're sort of getting a taste of this over the last year or so, half of it with Trump. Now we're starting to get some of the Biden insanity, and you can just extrapolate and project out where this is going. And you talk about the removal of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and all these things. You start to hear about that if you're paying attention and listening for things having to do with it, you'll start to hear, well, the Bill of Rights, it's an outdated piece of paper, and maybe we need to modernize it. And you're like, here they come. They're coming for it. You can feel it. You can feel the totalitarian tiptoe. They're coming for the Bill of Rights. So it can't happen. Well, I shouldn't say it can't happen overnight, but if they want to do it the right way, it shouldn't happen overnight. It has to be more of an incremental thing. I think we've watched over the last 8 months, 9 months or so, the World Economic Forum take things too fast. And so if they really want to get rid of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, it's going to have to be an incremental removal of a right here, there, whatever. And unfortunately, they found the perfect way to do that through the cover of an invisible virus that's going to come and kill everybody. And because everybody's scared and because everybody wants to be helpful in this, then they can say, well, if you want to be helpful and you want to stop the virus and not kill grandma, then you're going to need to give up X, Y, and Z. And that's how it's done.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, and a lot of this, I mean, that's what I think for people like you and I that are a little bit more clued into the alternative version of history, right? It's a lot more linear in the progression. You spend a lot of time actually, kind of talking about the war on terror, because that was the last invisible enemy that they used. And we've lived through now this 20-year long period where clearly, and you just outline in the book, step by step by step, how they've chipped away at the concept of individual rights by using the war on terror as their excuse.
Yeah. It's and that taught them how to do it. If you've got an invisible enemy like terrorists are around every corner. In the Octopus book, I break out the statistic that, statistically speaking, you are more likely to die in the United States from a vending machine falling on you on a Thursday than you are to die from a terrorist, because it's 7 times, they're 7 times more likely. It's just you can't. So you find that statistic and you go, wait, so like nobody's dying from terrorism inside the United States? And the answer is no. 13 people or something, meanwhile, like 100 people die from vending machines falling on them every year. Peace and love to those families that had to bury somebody from a vending machine falling on them. I'm not trying to belittle or make fun of them, but it's such a preposterous thing to have happen. And yet we've spent trillions of dollars fighting terror, and it's not even a real threat. And so they learned that if you scare people enough, you can get them to voluntarily give up their rights. And so with that terrorism, war on terror concept, 9/11 as the blueprint, Then you get to COVID and you see that they're just dusting off that playbook and just rolling out even more. They're using this as the pretext to take as the removal of rights, and it happens all the time. And you can see this thing coming a mile away, and that's of course what we're facing right now. And what's crazy about it is if you people are so brainwashed these days, it seems, that if you point this out to them, they will attack you for not taking the virus seriously enough.
Right.
So the propaganda is working very well.
Well, I mean, and that was one thing that kind of popped into my mind as we were talking about it. Even in the title of the book, calling the United States an empire would be a shock to many people, I think,
Yeah.
who really believe that no, we're over there fighting for their freedom, and we're this democratic republic, we're a beacon of freedom, and so even using the word empire to describe it, but then even to go further and say, well, and clearly it's an empire in decline. Is just a completely different take on the history of the United States than most people, I think, because of the propaganda, are even willing to really contemplate. So why don't what are the characteristics of empire? You've touched on this a little bit already, but what are the characteristics of empire, and then what are the characteristics that show that this particular empire is in decline?
So there's a cycle that has been discussed where it's like an 8-part wheel, and I forget what all of the parts are named or what they say, but it is undeniable that we are on the 8th one. I mean, if you look at the classification, like what it means to be there, there's no debate. It is the bread and circuses component, of the Roman empires. Debasing of the currency.
Yeah.
In the Roman Empire, they expand. So it's the expansion of the military, starting indiscriminate wars around the globe that you cannot finance, and when you can't steal enough resources from these other places, you wind up like unable to defend this territory that you've taken. But the debasing of the currency was one that kind of cracked me up, because they did a thing called coin clipping, which was you'd take your gold or silver coins and they would just clip little like pizza slice edges out of all the way around the coin, just little ones, and then collect up all those pieces. And they do that with 5 or 6 coins until you got enough, melt it down, and then make a new coin out of it. So
classic.
So I was like, damn, the Federal Reserve learned their tricks from the Romans. They were. So it's like when you are in charge of the printing press with your currency, you'll always debase it. It's just like human nature. You just can't help but kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And so the Romans did that. All these other empires that had would hyperinflate their currency at some point. It got down to like not just the bread and circuses, but just like debauchery and just a lack of social cohesion, and whatever the media was, whatever the news source, no matter what time frame you were talking about, that news source was always corrupted by the state. And the people eventually figured that out and didn't trust anything that was coming from it. And then there started to be internal fights because of that. And there would be some people that would believe the state and some people that would be aggressively against it. And it just always fizzles out. Now, so that's where we are. And in America, look, I'm an American. I want things to be great here. I don't think they have been for a while. We've been living off of our reputation. But if you tell somebody that America is an empire, and you describe what empires do, a lot of Americans will fight you on it. They don't want to believe that. They don't want to acknowledge that they are a part of that. But that is just, that's just them being not being objective about it, because, and that's yet again, great to have Berwick on the team, because he sees this. He's not as invested in America as a Canadian living in Mexico. So he can see the flaws that a lot of us can't see. And so, and there are plenty of them. It's not to say that, America, there's some fantastic things about America. And I don't mean to bash it, but the government is crazy. it is, I mean, it is run by psychopaths. And so that mentality, of course, filters into our politics and our foreign policy and the way it interacts with people, the way we interact with other countries. And so, we have some psychopathic tendencies and you need to be fair, if you're running an empire. I mean, empires don't, you don't get empires of like peaceful people. They don't
Right.
think like that. You only get empires when you have psychopaths looking to dominate and control others. And so, look, if people aren't willing to admit that that is America's mentality, then they're not being honest, because America is most definitely psychopathic in our foreign policy, and the way we treat those that get on the wrong side of us. I mean, we'll play every dirty trick we can
Yeah.
to get them in line. So it's the idea of our empire coming to an end. It seems, another characteristic, and this is actually very fitting. I think a lot of people could probably recognize this, is that in the cases of the previous empires that fell apart, the people that were living in them, a huge component, a big section of those people were the last to figure it out. They didn't see what was happening right in front of their eyes. And it's because the propaganda and the normal, like this normalcy bias that like, oh, well, I guess everything will just eventually be okay and everything's going to be fine. They're like,
yeah,
those people in the empires are like the people in Pompeii, that are just frozen in time, because they couldn't recognize and they couldn't see it for what it was, that the wheels are coming off, things are bad, they're going to get worse. And they're the whole time going, no, everything has got to be fine, right? Everything's fine. And it's like,
right.
no.
Just get the vaccine. Just get the vaccine, and everything will go back to normal, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's that mentality. It's that you want that normalcy so much. And if someone says, well, if you do this, then that equals normalcy, we'll go back to normal. They go, okay, fine, let me try that. Well, it's a trap, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's characteristics of this end stage that we're basically on the verge of collapse. One of the characteristics of the United States that may be different, I mean, certainly probably different from the way that it was in Russia, is the quality of the propaganda. I think the American people have been so. I mean, again, like the term empire, well, gosh, you're calling America an empire? That's strange. And then to call the American news media propaganda, right? People think you're crazy. Like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. And I think about this a lot. I'm trying to remember the name of the journalist. There was a journalist in the 80s that covered the Behind the Iron Curtain. And he was saying in the 80s, I think it was John Pilger, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
He was a British journalist. And he said the difference between the propaganda in Behind the Iron Curtain and the propaganda in the West is that everybody behind the Iron Curtain knows that it's propaganda.
Right.
But people in the West think it's a free press, and this is all part of our free society. And it's just mind-boggling that people don't see that, like, if it's coming from the corporate, I like to call it the corporate government complex, because people seem to think that they're somehow different, or that the government is somehow creating a check or a balance on corporate power. But in fact, when I observe it, it looks like they're working, hand in hand, hand in glove together to accomplish these goals. So when information is coming out of the corporate system, it's clearly corporate propaganda. And
Great
it's
trick.
just fascinating that more people don't get that. I mean,
they it's the cognitive dissonance is a fascinating
right
concept.
We could make a whole show on that. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting to watch people have to reconcile this, because I mean, look, to be fair, if you're in your, if you're in your midlife, and somebody says to you everything that you've believed before is probably not true. If you've gotten it from the corporate media, there's a major slant to it. A lot of this stuff is not true, and so that person has a decision to make. Do I accept this and then have to go back through my entire life and sort of like figure out, okay, well, if this is a lie, what else is a lie? I have to unpack my whole life to see if how much I've been lied to. That's a big ask for a lot of people. And so I can understand why some people would say, I'm not interested in that. I've got my thing going. I believe what I believe. I know how to function in this current state of mind, and I'm just going to keep going with that. I can understand it. I don't respect it, but I can certainly understand it. And part of that is an understanding that the corporate mainstream media is a propaganda outfit. That's what they're there for. That's what they're designed for. They're very good at disguising it, not as much anymore, but there's still a huge percentage of the population that turns on CNN and thinks they're getting real news, and they are not. So if you can crack those people's, if you can get to them and get them to at least acknowledge that some of the things that are coming out of their television, especially through the nightly news, are designed to make them feel a certain way, and it's not anchored in reality. It's just lies. Well, if you can get them to start to distrust their media, then you're on the right track. But it is very difficult for a lot of people, especially the older you get, the longer you've had this relationship with media, the harder it is to get honest about what it is. Like, as an example, like if the media was your girlfriend, you'd have a restraining order against it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you'd be like, if your friends would be like, why are you still with her? She lies to you constantly. She never tells you the truth.
A seriously abusive relationship. Yeah.
It's a totally abusive relationship. And if you can get people to kind of understand that and then go, oh yeah, like I did a thing with my mom had come over to my house. It was like noon on a Thursday or something. She just stopped by, and we were sitting around and we were talking for a while, and we turned on the TV, and there was breaking news. It was the San Bernardino shooting.
Right.
And I said, and I hadn't heard anything about it. She hadn't heard anything about it. We were just seeing it on the news. We were like 2 minutes into it. And I turned to her and I said, I want to play a game with you. If I can tell you 5 things that are going to happen with this shooting. And if I could tell you 5 things that are going to happen with this shooting, I don't know any more than you know right now. But if I can tell you 5 things and they come true, will you believe me that these shootings and these events are not organic? And she was like, go for it. Yeah. And so I rattled off a bunch of them. I said, okay, first of all, the so-called perpetrators will be killed. They'll be shot. They'll blow them to smithereens. Second of all, they will leave a manifesto somewhere claiming that they're doing this for Allah or Islam or something, or because of our wars in the Middle East.
Yeah.
I said they will contaminate the crime scene. There will be conflicting information about military gunmen instead of these people. And what was the last one I said? I forget what the last thing I said was. Anyway, I said these are the things that are going to happen, and let's see how it plays off. Within 24 hours, I sent her images of the media showing up at their house in their apartment when there's like 15 people from the media all in there with their cameras going through their apartment. And one guy's like, hey, I found a manifesto. Totally contaminating the crime scene, just in the most unnatural way ever. And then we watched, more of the headline, more of the news. And eventually we saw the trucks that were all shot up. I go, well, there's the shoot up. And then they discovered the manifesto. And then there were reports from eyewitnesses that were at the place where the shooting started. There's a lady who was like, listen, I was there, and there were 3 white men in military fatigues that were in their early 30s that had machine guns, and they were doing the shooting.
Right.
So it's like, and I said that, show that to my mom, and she goes, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
And I said, she does believe it, but she was like, this is just amazing. And I said, nothing is real on your television set. If you're watching the news, it's not real. And And if once you sort of have that awakening, then you go, oh, okay, well, if this isn't real, what else is not real? So I think that if as a country, America in general, one of the best things we could do it would be if everybody collectively became more distrustful of the corporate news, because it is there as a tool to control us, and it is in no way there for our benefit.
Right. I mean, it's amazing, actually. And this is before the coronavirus. I was there. I understood this, but watching the coronavirus go down, I have been blown away. Like, if people weren't watching their TV, I can tell you from my personal experience here in Mendocino County, California, my wife actually got a weird flu December 2019.
A lot
And
of people
then,
did.
right? Weird flu. She said to me specifically, I've never felt anything like that before. That was weird. That was a different flu. Oh, interesting, honey. And then a few weeks later, actually, maybe a month or 6 weeks later, we were starting to hear about the coronavirus. Another friend of ours got sick. She went to the hospital. Like, maybe I have coronavirus, and they wouldn't even allow her to have a test. Like, she was actually really sick, but they were shutting down the hospitals, preparing for that rush of coronavirus cases they knew were going to come. So here's somebody almost guaranteed had coronavirus,
Right.
showing up to get the test, actually getting rejected. To me, that was the first wave. Those two people I knew that got sick. Then, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago now, or a while back, I feel like we did have a second wave go through the community. I heard about a few people who passed away at our local elder home in the
Mhm.
nearest city, and a few people in the ICU that they thought had COVID. And that's all I've heard about in my personal life. Like, if there was no TV, if there was no NPR, then it would have been like, wow, that was a wild kind of, there was a weird flu bug going on, and that would have been it
Yeah.
in my personal life. And I think that's true for pretty much everyone. I haven't talked to anyone, that's like, I was overwhelmed with the death that was happening all around me, and the pandemic was just horrific. It's just, and again, I mean, I realize that people have passed away from this, and my heart goes out to those people. But one of the things I wanted to bring up to tie it back to the media, and just to say that, the problem of this new virus hasn't been nearly worth the response.
Right.
Um, I mean, for one thing, you were talking about, the odds of somebody dying from terrorism. We're having this huge conversation right now about giving the vaccine to people under 12. I think people under 12 have a higher chance of getting struck by lightning than dying of the coronavirus. Like, what are we talking about giving vaccines to people under 12? It's ridiculous. But just to tie it into the media, I remember the first thing that I thought was crazy, and the first thing that really clued me into, they're just trying to scare people. None of this has a basis in reality. Was when they very first started testing people, and of course they were only testing the sickest people. If you came to
Mhm.
the hospital, you were on the verge of death, they were throwing these people straight onto the ventilators, and they were coming up with a case fatality rate of like 3%. And they were going, oh my God, 3% of people who are getting this are dying. Well, no, because you're only testing the sickest people. We have to figure it out. And I did my research. Like, what does case fatality rate mean? Oh, okay, the real number that we're interested in is the infection fatality rate when they estimate how many people have actually gotten the disease overall, and then figure out how many people died from that. And then I started seeing all over the mainstream news, they're comparing this 3% number, the case fatality rate from COVID, to the 0.1% number, which is the estimated infection fatality rate for the flu. And they're saying, my God, look at how much worse it is than the flu. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking to myself, do none of them know the difference between the infection fatality rate and the case fatality rate? Like, how can this be possible? I mean, the amount of control, the number of reporters that must have just, I mean, that's what boggles my mind, is how the reporters cannot ask the right questions or not recognize that these statistics are totally bogus and then just continue to report what they report. And I mean, looking into it, they're just reading off the teleprompter and they're doing what they're told. And they know if they complain about it, they're going to lose their cush job. And so they don't even think about it. And they're not doing any investigative journalism. But it's just fascinating the kind of stuff that they come out with. And the coronavirus, just all those propaganda techniques were used and implemented and just to scare the crap out of people. And it didn't have to make sense. And it was all on the TV. And if people weren't watching the TV, then we would have had a kind of a gnarly flu bug going around last year and everything else could have stayed the same.
Yep. It reminds me of this interview I saw with Noam Chomsky where he was getting interviewed by a guy at the BBC, and he's pushing back on the BBC guy a little bit. And the BBC guy says, "What are you saying? Are you saying that I don't believe the things that I'm saying to you?" And Chomsky goes, "No, what I'm saying is if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair."
Yeah.
And it reminds me of that's what it is with the media. You could be a great investigative journalist. You could find that those numbers don't add up. And there's a lot of people out there doing that. But if you're the guy that's going to blow the whistle on that, you just wouldn't be sitting in the chair, in the mainstream media chair. So
yeah.
They don't want thinkers. They want workers. They want you to report what they're being told. You can dig into the math. Like, so as an example of this made me insane. And I think a lot of people too. The headline comes out end of August 2020, says 169,000 Americans dead from coronavirus. And you go, oh my God, what a headline. That's crazy. And you go and you read down and you get to the last paragraph. And the last paragraph says, of the 169,000 dead, only 6% died with only coronavirus.
Yeah.
On their the other 94% died with coronavirus and on average 2.6 comorbidity conditions, and which was like heart attack, heart disease, cancer, pneumonia. I mean, it was a long list of things.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so dying, there is a difference between dying from it and dying with it. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody that has died from it, because I acknowledge that there are people dying from it. But 6% of 169,000 is like 10,000. And that is not a pandemic. I'm sorry. I mean, to those that died from it, of course, it doesn't, the stats don't matter. It's the most important thing in the world to them, their family and all that. I get that 100%. But taking just a bigger picture look, that is statistically insignificant, the number of deaths. And it goes to show that they're playing with the numbers. They've been playing with the numbers from the beginning. They played with the PCR test that came out, and they ran it at 35 cycles, which even Fauci admitted will give you 97% false positives there. Kary Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test, who won the Nobel Prize for it, had huge battles with Fauci about Fauci saying you wanted to use it as a diagnostic tool. He said, that's not what it's made for. You can set the cycles so high and you'll just get positives on everything. It doesn't mean anything. So they played games with those numbers. They played games with the death numbers. They played games with the case numbers. They played every number that they could manipulate, they manipulated.
Yeah.
And then when we point that out, they go, "What are you, a conspiracy theorist?"
Right.
It's like, no, I'm somebody that understands stats and math, and I also know that you guys have a propensity to lying to the general public because you're forming some sort of narrative. You're being told what to do by Council on Foreign Relations, Atlantic Council, whoever. But we know that if you pick apart these numbers, you're manipulating them. So, but if you bring that out to somebody who doesn't understand the role of the media and government and big pharma in lying to people, they see you as the threat. They see you as somebody that's not taking it seriously. You're being disrespectful to those that have it. You probably need to wear a mask. I'm definitely going to want you vaccinated. All of these things. And it's like really a devious trick, because they started with the media convincing everybody what to do. But then the media got to a point where they could take their hands off the steering wheel and allow the radicalized public to then do their job for them and target everybody that's not participating, not playing ball with this. And so when you walk into a store without a mask, you've got 100 people with masks that want to kill you, you know? And so it's like they're doing all the hard work for the government and for the media. They're radicalizing these people into brown shirts and having them go out there and do the policing. It's frankly, it's brilliant if you think about it, but totally psychopathic. And this is where we are. It's like you said, it's the old Bill Hicks bit where he says, you know, I turn on my TV and it's death and destruction and murder and robbery and all this terrible stuff going on. And then I open my window and stick my head out and it's crickets. None of that's happening. And it's the same thing. It was a made for television pandemic.
Yeah.
And you know, CNN and these news organizations, their job, I mean, they're framing, they're creating a narrative, and anything that contradicts with it, they leave out and they crop things or edit things in a way that bolsters their opinion about what's happening, and we're all going to die, and 6 feet social distancing, and we were all going 6 feet. So where's the science behind 6 feet? They're like, oh, it's real sciencey. And then the CDC comes out and says, well, actually for kids now we're going to cut it down to 3 feet. Okay, great. Did the virus get 50% less strong?
Right.
You know, like where's the science for that? Well, there is no science behind it. There's none of it makes any sense. But if you have a white lab coat on, or you're in front of a television camera and in a bank of microphones like Fauci, everyone just goes, oh, well, he must be telling me the truth because he's a doctor and doctors would never lie, and therefore I have to listen to him. And so it's been disappointing, frankly, to watch the public just fall in line, just fall in line. We were promised dead bodies stacked on the sidewalks, like in the olden days. We were promised all that. We never got it, thankfully. But so where is all that stuff? We never saw it. We had to wear the masks. And now what? So anyway, it's been disappointing and frustrating to watch it, but at the same time, I can't say I was really surprised. I think that the job that the media and the government has done over the years to convince the public of just about anything. 19 Arab hijackers with box cutters, and we found his passport at 3 blocks away from the World Trade Center site, if you can believe that. And all these obvious lies that people are still believing, 20 years later. So I'd love to say I was surprised by the people just blindly following the dictates, but I wasn't, unfortunately I wasn't surprised.
Yeah. I mean, so much of this falls back to that psychological angle that we were discussing before, because somehow, I mean, maybe there's some truth to the fact that the TV just literally hypnotizes people, and I think, and there's certainly truth to the fact that once people are frightened, then they get triggered and they lose that critical thinking ability. And they're just doing what they're told on the TV. And it is sad. It is frightening. I have the same, you mentioned the term radicalization, because I've even had some friends around here that I'm not nearly as close with anymore, because they were starting to really accuse Trump supporters, right? The TV was telling everyone that Trump supporters were these white nationalist, fascist Republicans, conspiracy theorists that, and all the divide and conquer techniques that were racist and dangerous, and people were just believing it, that Trump was the next Hitler. And then now, of course, we're seeing these calls for domestic terrorism laws to tighten down even further on these extremists that think these insane views. I think people like you and I recognize that this is the system's way of targeting all of us, quote unquote, conspiracy theorists, anybody who disagrees with the government corporate narrative, right? They're trying to be able to hoover us in and scare the rest of the people. But I had this aha moment when I was like, what's going on with my friends that have become, just the hatred and the vitriol of the Trump supporters. And, and they're accusing a certain portion of the population. I've even heard the term radicalization radicalized Trump supporters on NPR. I mean, NPR just comes out and says it like that. These people have been radicalized into white nationalism or whatever, these Trump supporters. And I started thinking to myself, I think it's the people listening to NPR who are being radicalized.
Yes.
And is exactly what's happening. I mean, now, like, I go to the store to get my morning coffee, and I'll listen to NPR for like 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm analyzing it on this level. And I'm like, if I believed this, I would be radicalized into a state of, like you're talking about, being a brown shirt, running around and wanting to turn in my neighbor who doesn't want to wear a mask, or, so and so had 2 or 3 people over at their house for a barbecue, and I don't think they were wearing masks. And I mean, and that is when society really takes that dangerous turn. That's when we start to be like, how they can get the mass of people to police this globalist technocratic agenda, to police their neighbors, see something, say something.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how people don't get that is the characteristic of the society that's Nazi Germany 1935, 1936, right? I mean, that is exactly what starts to happen. That's what happens in Soviet Russia right before Stalin takes over and starts the purges, or when Mao takes over, and they can convince enough of the members of the population to do the police work for them.
Yes. Yeah. Cultural revolutions. That's how they start. They do all. The irony, though, is that the people that are, like you said, the people that are listening to NPR, and NPR is talking about the radicalization of the right, of the Trump supporters. That wasn't happening. There are people, they like Trump. They weren't radicalized. They weren't white nationals. They weren't I mean, the white national thing is such a joke. It's like the Ku Klux Klan is the laughing stock of these groups. They can't get 40 people to join their local thing, and yet this is a gigantic problem that everybody has to be afraid of white nationalism.
That's another thing that happened to me with these particular friends, where I would literally be saying to them, is white nationalism a problem in our community? Are you seeing, are a lot of your friends radicalized into white nationalism? Are your Republican friends really starting to show these Nazi-like tendencies? I mean, can you give me some examples? And then it would just be silence, or, lashing back out at me like I was a white nationalist because I was doubting what they were seeing on TV, not what's happening in our community, right?
Right.
Just what they're being told on TV. It's fascinating to witness, actually.
Yeah, the irony being that they were behaving more like radicals themselves.
Yeah.
And that's how the brown, like I would see last summer, you would see Antifa going around and breaking windows and lighting fires and doing all this stuff. And they're talking about how they're going to have a revolution, and they started Chaz or Chop or whatever it was. And they're like, oh, we're going to grow our own gardens. I mean, it was just the most cartoonish type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember doing a podcast saying, these dummies, they have no idea about history. Because if they did, they would realize that they are the brown shirts. They are not the Hitler's brown shirts. But what happened was that the brown shirts were used early on to start the chaos and the riots. As a parallel organization, the SS was quietly brought up along on the other side that they weren't told about. And when the timing was right, Hitler took the SS and said, get rid of the brown shirts. And they wiped them out. So Antifa, not knowing their history, has no idea that they're walking into a gigantic trap, that they're going to be discarded and disposed of the minute their useful existence is over. They will be washed away, and everyone will go, oh, well, that was an interesting little experiment, because the real authoritarians are coming to town. And that, to me, I was very uncomfortable last summer when the riots were kicking off, and you started to hear these calls for, well, we need to bring in the National Guard. And I thought, well, that's a bad idea. Because when the National Guard is unable or unwilling to shoot at Americans, they will bring in the United Nations. And if they bring in the United Nations, it's time to leave.
Yeah.
If the UN troops show up inside the United States, if you're waiting for, like, what is the signal for me to get the hell out of here? Like, I wonder what the signal. I'll give you one of the signals. If the UN shows up inside the United States on a peacekeeping mission to patrol, that is the signal to get out, because
Yeah.
things are about to get really dark. So the left, and I'm not on the right and I'm not on the left. I'm in the stands throwing rocks at both of them.
Well,
I don't like either of these parties, but
and it was even the people on the right that were calling for the National Guard to fight the Antifa people on the left. And that was a classic divide and conquer tactic, where they're moving you towards what they want by pitting the left and the right against each other.
Yes.
It's so crazy. It's just such a classic example of that.
And we have to give them credit, the controllers, for understanding how this, they really are good at getting us fighting with each other and doing, well, at this point, we're going to introduce this, and then we're going to introduce that.
Yeah.
And we'll get these people to fight with each other. I give them credit for being psychopathic manipulators. They're really
Right.
good at what they're doing. And also, to be fair, I've lost a lot of respect for the common American who just has outsourced their critical thinking to the media and just said, you do all that thinking for me. It's just so difficult. You tell me who to hate. You tell me who to like. You tell me what I want, and then I'll do it. So, you tell me I have to get vaccinated? All right, I'll get vaccinated. Not only that, I'll tell everybody they have to get vaccinated too. Just, so I lost the respect of people that
it's tough,
that were unwilling to really take a step back and go,
yeah,
wait a second, what's actually going on here? And I get it. Not everybody has the time or the whatever to think about these things, but you probably should, because this is really impacting your current situation. It's definitely going to have an impact on the future. Some of the things that we're mandating, it's like, this is insanity, and it's insanity disguised as science too, on top of that. So
right.
So it made me think of this right around it was like the middle of March, right when everything kind of kicked off. I had James Corbett on my show, and we were talking about the idea of, what if instead of traditional martial law, what if they imposed some form of medical martial law? And wouldn't that be a more devious way? Because it wouldn't be troops on the street corners. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be all these things that we talked about. Like, this is a sign, when this happens, get out. It's more subtle. It's a medical version of that, where instead of the troops telling you to get in your home, it's the media telling you, well, there's viruses out there and you might die, so everyone needs to stay home. And what a psychological operation that was, to convince everybody to do that. And I just reconnected. I just had James back on a week ago, and we talked about, like, well, okay, now it's been a year since our first conversation. When we were predicting things, how did it actually play out? And unfortunately, a lot of the things that we had talked about wound up coming true. And that was not because James has like a crystal ball or anything. It's just because you understand the pattern, and you understand where they're you know where they want to take us, so you can kind of work backwards to see how would you go about getting everybody there. So it's been 2020 and this first part of 2021. Boy, if it wasn't so damn important and dangerous and scary, it would be fascinating to just study it. Just how much can we learn about human psychology and media manipulation and big pharma fear tactics, and how they get us scared, and what a fascinating case study. I wish we weren't living through it. I don't like that we're living through this experiment, but I recognize that they will be talking about this phase of our history for years and years and years, and we will be looking back on that going, wow, look at what a number they did on us. The manipulation was unreal, and they convinced all these people that they were going to die from a virus with a 99.98% chance of survival. And God, how were you able to do that? Well, we were able to do it because we had the media and we had big pharma, and they're really good at scaring people. And we just scared them so long that it broke their brains, and they were unable to process any sort of new information. And they were fully dependent on us to tell them how to feel and how to think and what to be scared of. And that's how we did it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. I mean, if you've got to build back, then first you've got to destroy something. And that is exactly what we're experiencing now. And we've seen this, as you describe it, the controlled demolition now going on for a long time, with the coronavirus thing as finally the pulling of the plug, right? The plunging of the controlled demolition.
Yeah.
And we're watching the buildings fall right now. And now they have their opportunity to build back. Whether or not it's going to be better or not, then that is yet to be seen. And that
Yeah.
kind of brings me to I think my final question, which is that one of the things you mentioned towards the beginning, and I think it's important to say, is that, you know, you and I aren't sitting here advocating for the American empire. Clearly, I mean, I think a lot of us, we've been screaming against it forever. We're just noticing that now it's collapsing to be replaced by this now global empire that we're also not supporting.
Yes.
But I think you mentioned something, and at the end of the book, you discuss this. I think that there is going to be a window of opportunity. I mean, for one thing, these questions that we've covered a lot of this about the coronavirus pandemic, is that there, it's, you know, it's going to backfire, and some, and perhaps many, are gonna kind of start to have some serious questions about, like,
Yeah.
hey, wait a minute, you know, I am only seeing a pandemic on my television set. It's not happening in my community. So why am I locked in my house? Why can't I just go back to work? Why are we talking about a new normal?
Hmm.
And so some people are waking up as a result of some blowback from this particular psychological operation, as happened to a lot of people with 9/11, right? And you know, various other episodes along the way. So people are starting to figure this out. And then I actually think we have this great window of opportunity, because when the current paradigm collapses, then it's like we have a clean slate.
Yeah.
And so we have the opportunity all of a sudden, if we can figure this out, and we can kind of start to, you know, and we can maneuver politically at the right time, and there are enough of us, we'll have an opportunity to build back in our own way. We don't have to do what these guys are telling us. So
Yeah.
what are some solutions? What are some potential solutions, you know, over the next couple of years? I mean, we're already seeing the inflation come on. We've seen so many, you know, the characteristics, you brought them all up in the book. The controlled demolition is happening clearly over the course of the next couple of years. This is going to accelerate. We're going to have some pretty serious problems. We're hearing about, you know, potential food shortages, supply chain shortages of all types. We've already seen lumber prices going through the roof, food prices going up, energy prices going up. So as things get worse, I think, again, we'll see this window. And so what solutions do you see? What do you think we can do when that window opens up, right? That can maybe potentially chart the path towards a better future?
Yeah, there's going to be some opportunities for sure. Whenever you have a massive change like this, there's going to two things are going to happen. You're going to have a lot of people that are slow to adapt to it, and they're going to be wiped out. Maybe it'll just change their world too much. But there's going to be a certain segment of the population that recognizes the signs or saw this coming, made some plans in advance, and made moves. We describe it in the book, you know, at the end of talking about December 26th, 2004, in Banda Aceh in Indonesia, when they had, you know, when these people woke up in the morning, they went down to the beach and there was no water. The water was gone. It was sucked out. And
Hmm.
they were like, wow, this is crazy. They walked out where the water had been and found starfish and took pictures and all that. The people that knew what that meant immediately went to high ground. And ironically, all the animals too. They said the elephants and everything were already heading up the hills,
Right.
because the people with experience recognize this is the begin. This is a tsunami is coming. The water goes out, it builds up, it's coming back in, and when it comes back in, it's going to come in with some force. You cannot wake everybody up. You cannot yet get everybody on that beach out of there. You're going to tell the people around you. You're going to tell the people that will listen to you, get to higher ground now. Let's go. And because of that, because of the experience that you have in recognizing these signs, you will be positioned in a place, in a way that a lot of this misses you. It's going to hit a lot of people.
Yeah.
And of course we don't want that. We don't love that. But you, to be realistic, you're not going to be able to save everybody. So start thinking like that. Start planning. Like if you're somebody that likes, your show or my show, you're into these alternative ways of thinking. There's a price that you pay for that. Maybe your friends and family kind of like, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist or whatever. They're dismissive of you or make little comments or whatever. So you pay some price. There is a benefit though. One of the benefits is that you get access to information that you don't hear on the mainstream news. You work off of a different source material. You're getting different information. And because of that, you're going to be able to see this stuff unfolding right in front of your eyes. The difference is you have to do one more thing. You have to take an additional step of acting on it. And that will be your benefit. That'll make all of the mockery and humiliation that friends and family have showered on you for years and years for being into these alternative things. It'll make it all worthwhile because you will be prepared for it. Now, whether that's, prepping and things like that, which of course we owe the preppers a big apology. They were right, know, but like thinking about this in not just saying, oh, wouldn't it be weird if this stuff happened? Well, then taking the additional step of saying, well, I'm going to prepare for it. I'm going to get myself out of the banking system because we know the banking system is going to collapse. And maybe that means taking it out and putting it in physical cash, which will probably help you for, a little bit of time, but the having the dollar might not be the best thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's buying physical silver or physical gold or certain forms of crypto. Obviously not all of them are designed the same. Some are privacy coins. Some of them are, more easily, some of them are more stable than others. So whatever it is that you think, start making plans for the monetary system to break down. Start making plans for the supply chain system to break down. God, we saw what happened with toilet paper. People were ready to stab each other.
Right.
What happens when the food runs out? You know what I mean? I mean, we're going to come unhinged. So all of these things that could go wrong, we know about. Not all of them, but a lot of them we know about. We've talked about them. We've speculated about them. It's time for us to put our money where our mouth is and to start making sure that we are prepared for that. And now for some people, that might mean leaving a big city. That might mean leaving the country that you're in. It's gonna vary depending on who you are. It might be today is the signal that I am getting my kids out of those government schools because they're being taught all kinds of insanity, and I'm going to do something different. I'm going to homeschool them. I'm going to unschool them and some of these things. And at Anarchapulco, they've got guys like David Rodriguez, who's doing the Gatto Institute. He's talking about homeschooling and unschooling and all these unique methods of educating your kids in a very different way that takes them out of that government system. All of these things have to be on the table. And if you're into these topics, you're going to know about them. You're going to hear about these things and they're going to become very valuable to you. So it's important for people, I think, to realize that the world is changing, and the world's always changing, but it is about to go through a rather large change. And it's all going to, where you come out on the other end, it is going to be dependent on how you position yourself before it happens and what you do in advance of that. And if you do the right things and if you recognize the signs and you act on them and you trust yourself, I see where this is going. And the mainstream media and all my friends are telling me the exact opposite, but I don't care what they're saying because I trust that what I am recognizing is actually real despite all the noise. And then I'm going to make plans accordingly. When all this goes down, you're going to be positioned in a way to take advantage of this new paradigm. And you might even find that it makes your life so much better after this. And so that's what I really want to stress to people. There are things that are within your control. Yes, there are plenty of factors that are out of your control, but there are some things that you can do yourself. So start thinking like the end is coming. And I know that sounds crazy a bit. Maybe don't broadcast that to everybody that you know, because they'll have you fitted for a straitjacket, but just make some plans like in preparation for that. And you'll feel like you're doing something because you are doing something.
Yeah.
And you'll never want to take joy in this metaphorical tsunami coming, because you know it's going to hurt a bunch of people. But you will feel proud of yourself for trusting your instincts, for recognizing what you see with your eyes, and making the decision, okay, I see this coming. I do know that there are some solutions. I'm going to start incorporating those in my life. And then when it happens, you're going to be so thankful that you did. And look, to be fair, I wish none of this stuff was coming. And I hope that all the people that go prep and buy a bunch of food and everything, I hope they have to eat it someday when there is no emergency. You know what I mean? That would be a great thing. But in the absence of that, plan for the worst, and I don't say that to be like fear mongering or anything like that. It's not about fear mongering. It's about reality. It's about recognizing what is coming, and then taking the steps to prevent that. And if we're able to do that, and you're able to do that for yourself and your family, and maybe your friends that will listen to you, those that will listen to you, give them the information. Those that want to tell you you're crazy, prioritize your time, man. It's just those people you can't reach them. Your time is better spent on other things and other people. But it is going to be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting part of our lives to go through this and see how crazy it gets, and then to come out the other side. And we have the ability right now, early on, to make some moves and put ourselves in a much better spot.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great, Charlie. I mean, one of the things that really jumps out to me, and it's a decision that I actually had to come, because I've spent a lot of time trying to yell from the rooftops and talk to people that don't want to hear what I have to say.
Me too.
Right? I mean, we've been there. And probably a few months ago, 6 months ago, I kind of realized that, like, I need to find my tribe and be around people who think like, who care about me, who think like I do. I don't need to be convincing. If somebody doesn't want to hear it, then I don't need to spend time convincing them. And then the other thing, like you're saying, is that to prepare for what may be coming, it's like a very individual thing. Like, we're not talking about joining a group or following the opposing political philosophy and having some kind of a big fight here.
Right.
It's like we need to really actually, and I think maybe there's something to this. Like, instead of replacing the old philosophy with the new philosophy, instead the new philosophy is just learn how to take care of yourself. Learn how to take care of yourself and your friends and your family that care about you, who think like you do, who are part of your physical, real, actual community, and become self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of yourself, and don't lean on the corporate system, the government systems. Don't think that you're entitled to all of these great programs, or that some, universal philosophy is going to come save you, because that's not reality. The reality is we're all just people trying to figure it out, and we got to take care of our own. And maybe if that's what comes out of all this, if enough of us are just like, you know what, thanks, but no thanks, I'm going to move out into the woods and start growing my own food and buy a couple of goats, and be happy enough, taking care of myself, have a little windmill that can make enough electricity to run my computer,
Yeah.
Then I'm going to be happy. And that's all that we need to do. And that's the revolution right there. So that's cool. Yeah.
Small steps. There's some little things that people can do, incremental things. Getting your money, converting your fiat dollars into something else that is not inflating, depreciating as we speak. And
right.
So the first step is to start thinking about it differently, and then, okay, well, what would I do if this event happens and things are horrible? What will I have wished that I did early on? Well, because it's early on now, and now you still have a chance to put these plans into place. So start thinking a little bit differently, and don't ever think, oh, well, the government will come and figure it out, and I'm sure it'll all be fine, because that's normalcy bias. That's saying today was normal and yesterday was normal, therefore tomorrow will be normal. And you know what? Tomorrow probably will be normal. But at some point, things will get weird, and you don't want to be sitting around going, "Oh God, I should have bought Bitcoin at $20." You
Yeah,
know what I
right.
mean? You're the. I mean, right now you can kind of go, "Oh, I wish I had bought Bitcoin there." Well, take that same philosophy of, "Oh, well, I kind of knew about it and I didn't act on it because I didn't think it was a thing," and then start to apply that to your current situation. Like, all right, well, what should I do as far as getting myself prepared? Act as if. So I
Yeah,
think that if we do that, the worst case scenario, look, you're prepared and nothing happens. Well, there's worse things than
right.
that could eventually happen to you than to be prepared. But this idea of being, actually that the philosophy and like, of being prepared is a good philosophy to have. It doesn't make you cynical. It just means your head is on a swivel. You're looking for all these possible things that could come after you. We're sort of designed to do that, right? We're upright creatures. We have, we can see what's coming at us. Let's start thinking like that again, because good Lord, the media and the government have tried to teach us that to not believe our eyes, and
Yeah,
to sit around and in like this learned helplessness where we just depend on them to tell us what to do, or who
right.
to be fearful of, or what to like, or what to hate, or how to be. And boy, we got to get off of that. It's counterproductive, and it doesn't serve anybody except the
Yeah.
state, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. What's the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to become an independent, sovereign human being. Whether the system collapses around you or not, those changes are positive.
Yes.
Right? You've liberated yourself. So, congratulations. All right.
Yep.
I hope that more and more of us can do that, especially as things progress here.
Yep. Me too.
Well, thank you so much for coming on again, Charlie, and thanks for your work and writing this book. I'm glad we were able to focus on this and really kind of talk about what's going on in terms of this controlled demolition that's happening, and perhaps provide some solutions here. But you want to give my audience once again your contact information where they can
Sure.
find out more, purchase the book.
Yeah, absolutely. My website is theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. That's the name of the first book. The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire is available on Amazon, and it just came out in audiobook format, so we're excited about that. And if you're interested, my podcast is called Macroaggressions. That's on all the podcast platforms, as well as David Icke's Iconic video platform, and Rockfin, and Odyssey, and YouTube. But man, I'll get thrown off of YouTube at some point, pretty soon. I
Right.
don't pretend to think that that's going to be a long-term solution for anything, but that's where people can find me if they're interested.
Sounds good. And I'll just take a second here at the end to let people know that you can find out more about The Shift at www.theshiftnow.com. Trying to funnel more and more people to the website, because that way we don't have to worry so much about the third-party platforms, and sign up for the newsletter there. And that way I will keep everyone informed as to all the new projects that I'm working on and everything that gets produced out of the studio here. You can find me. My personal page on Facebook has kind of been blowing up a little bit, so we're having some fun conversations there, and that's just under Doug McKenty. I'm also on Facebook at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and on YouTube and Odyssey, and multiple other social media sites, so you can find me. Again, the website's the best place to go. I'm also at D McKenty on Twitter, so you can find me there. Great. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and thanks again, Charlie, for coming on. That was another excellent conversation. I'm sure we'll be continuing to keep in touch as things progress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me back on. I really enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, you bet. Take care. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That's my conversation with Charlie Robinson. I just had a conversation with him. We had such a good conversation for episode 78, and I wanted to give him some more time. Not only did we just have a lot of fun, and I wanted to do it again, but I did want to give him time for the second book, The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. And I am glad that he came back on. Just so much information still, just like in Octopus of Global Control, so much information about what's been going on behind the scenes that has been slowly, over the course of time, weakening the United States as a hegemony, as a superior power sort of trying to control the whole planet. And we've clearly seen these internationalists, these globalists, eroding away the concept of civil liberties, eroding away the concept of individual freedoms, and looking for the angle to really go after that aspect of the American state, the pre-empire aspect of it, where we still had value for individual rights, freedoms, liberties, boundaries between the individual and the government. Because I think this is the major cultural characteristic that's holding these guys back. They cannot take control over an entire culture, a nation state that's been founded on the idea of individual rights. And this is why, again, having him back now after episode 79, where I talked with Nikki Rapina about communitarianism, because communitarianism is then trying to get this notion of human rights. You have a right to education, you have a right to health care, as opposed to individual rights, which would come at things from the point of view of you have a right to choose the type of education that you'd like, and you have the right to choose the type of healthcare that you like. And so it's interesting because ultimately, even though it sounds great to have these human rights, that everybody should have a place to stay and healthcare and everything that they need, I think at the end of the day we have to be very, very careful when we're having these kinds of conversations, because if we don't have the choice of the kind of house that we want to have, or we don't have the choice of the kind of education that we want, then inevitably we're giving control to that handful of people at the top. The way that the hierarchy is set up right now, this corporate government system, where a few people, and the people involved in these elite foundations that have the money, that hobnob in those scenes, that can pay for the think tanks and the grants that fund the government programs that decide how your children are going to get educated, and I think or the kind of healthcare that you're going to receive. And so this was a big part of the book. He discusses in the Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. Charlie discusses, how they did take over essentially a big portion of the healthcare system in the 1920s, a big portion of the education system, this larger system in the 1920s. Over the course of the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we've seen, and then of course certainly in the 1980s and 90s, the huge media consolidation that's occurred. So only a handful of corporations really decide 90% of the media that we all ingest, the news that we all receive. This amounts to a lot of control by just a handful of people. And especially when it comes to the media and the education system, then how are we supposed to be able to think for ourselves, make choices for ourselves? What kind of diversity are we going to be promoting when every community and every family has to learn the same history, has to learn the same way of life, has to learn that the world works in this same way? Over time, we're really running into a problem here. But it was because of the older characteristic of individualism that we had here in the United States, that these globalists, wanting to impose this kind of control, wanting to make sure that they're the ones selling us the education, they're the ones selling us the healthcare, making sure that we're all trapped consumers that have to purchase our lifestyle, the lifestyle that they feed to us, we purchase from them. And them alone. So by creating that kind of monopoly, that kind of homogeneity of lifestyle that everyone in the United States, everyone in the world is going to participate in, they're being the ones that have control of the resources and the manufacturing and the distribution of all the goods and services for exactly the lifestyle that they're going to be funneling us all into. And this is where it's going. And this, in order to impose this amount of control, we have to be promoting this concept of human rights and discounting the concept of individual rights. And so this is why Charlie wrote this book with Jeff Berwick, and why it's so important, and why they've pointed out the United States. I also think the Western democracies in Europe that had some of these same underlying concepts about individual freedom. With a lot of these lockdown measures. And I think that a lot of what's been going on, like, for example, how I think these guys at the World Economic Forum and elsewhere are really starting to promote the Chinese system. They've seen the Chinese Communist Party have a lot of success with this kind of blend of capitalism that they've been infusing into their system since the 1980s and 1990s. And they like the amount of control they have over the population, but where the upper classes are allowed to engage in this kind of capitalistic free enterprise that allows them to become extremely wealthy while the rest of the population is extraordinarily controlled. And I think when the upper classes here in the West, and certainly they're globalists, so they're all doing business together in China, just like they're all doing business together here, but they see the West as a hurdle. They can't control the population in the same way that they can in China. They don't have the social credit system set up and these other systems that need to be in place that the Chinese Communist Party has been able to put in place. And so lo and behold, we have this whole lockdown situation happening. COVID comes around. The media tells us what a great job China's done with it. They locked down hard right away because they had such control over their people. And lo and behold, in the United States, we have these pesky individual liberties, these anti-maskers who think that they have a right to healthcare freedom. They're getting in the way. The coronavirus has slipped through the cracks, and now it's been a disaster, and the Western democracies have to keep locking down and keep locking down, while China just did such a great job. It seems like they don't have a coronavirus problem anymore. All part of the rollout of this controlled demolition of the United States, and we'll see, I think, more and more, and certainly, I mean, we can chart this, and the corporations, again, the grants, the foundations, what have they been working on, how to implement social credit systems, vaccine passports, all of these kinds of things, Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies here in the United States, that they've already been able to implement and move forward with a lot of their plans in China. So these are the reasons why we're having this controlled demolition, and it's just really fascinating to see how Charlie and Jeff were able to chart this throughout the book, hitting multiple angles from healthcare, education, media, all across the board, describing how things are becoming weaker and weaker, and how the US dollar certainly is in a lot of trouble internationally as well. If we lose that world reserve currency, we start seeing a lot of this hyperinflation come in. This is going to be what pulls the trigger on the downfall for the whole building to fall. So a really interesting conversation with him that's kind of tying all of these disparate pieces together, and really refines and describes why the upper classes are trying to take down the United States. The other side of that, the foreign policy side of that, the arrogance of the American empire. He did have a bit in the book about American exceptionalism. I mean, I remember during the Bush administration just having to hear the United States foreign policy was literally just talking about American exceptionalism. They'd go to other countries and they'd say, well, we're the United States, so this is what we want. And so, and we're just exceptional people, so you have to do what we ask. And just so incredibly arrogant. The rest of the world is so sick and tired of it. And this is going to be leveraged against us as soon as any kind of an economic collapse happens, as soon as there's any kind of weakness in the infrastructure in the United States. The rest of the world is going to be very happy at this point to see the United States get put in its place. I think Charlie even just kind of talked about the schoolyard bully. Like everybody else in the world is going to start beating up on us because on the United States, because they've been beaten up upon and manipulated and pushed around for so long. And so this is all going to work in the favor of those that are pushing this world government that, of course, where the entire population, there's not going to be the inconvenience of nation states anymore for these transatlantic and transnational corporations to do business. They're not going to have to pay different tariffs and taxes and have different sets of regulations as they go from country to country. It can be all under one kind of a universal legal structure with, of course, the people that control the corporate system on top. So This is where things seem to be going. Another great conversation with Charlie. And so, yeah, I was happy to have him back on, especially with Nikki there in the middle to glue it all together with communitarianism. But I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I think that I'll be talking with Charlie again. We'll keep in touch and be talking with him again in the future, just because he and I are on such the same page with a lot of these issues. So again, really fun to talk to him. And if you want to check out more of his work or check out his podcast, Macroaggressions, you can find all of his stuff at www.theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. And of course, if you want to find out more about The Shift, you can just check all of my stuff out at www.theshiftnow.com. I've got Behind the Line. Looks like the name of that one is going to have to change here pretty soon. It sounds like George is no longer working with The Line, so we'll have to find another name, but we're going to keep cranking them out. The Psychology of Lockdown series. And I got the new one with Jason Bosch. He and I just had a conversation last week that we recorded that's going to be episode 1 for the new show, and I think we're searching for a name for that one as well. I was going to call it Crypto and Technocracy, but he wants to find a name that is a little more direct in terms of building bridges between people in the scene that have differing opinions about one issue or another, but just to try to unify everyone so that we can all work together to try to fight this information war and get the information out, and maybe even, God forbid, have some kind of a political coalition that can work against this globalization and start working to liberate not just the individuals but our communities from these larger economic systems that want to take control. So hopefully Jason and I can work on that. Again, you can find all of that stuff at the www.theshiftnow.com. You can find me, Doug McKenty, on Facebook. I also have a Shift with Doug McKenty page on Facebook, YouTube, Gab, MeWe, and the Telegram channel. Check out the Telegram channel for the Shift with Doug McKenty, and I'm on Twitter at DMcKenty. So if you're listening to this and you've made it all the way to the end, congratulations. Please think about liking and sharing this interview with all of your social media networks, because I'm relying on people like you to help distribute this podcast. It's not happening with the YouTube and the Twitter and the Facebook algorithms, that's for sure. So if you share this, then I thank you very much. You are the ones responsible for helping get the word out. All right, thanks everybody. Next week, I'm finally getting a Tantrika on to talk about Tantra. So we're going to talk a little Hinduism, Hindu philosophy, and talk about Tantra. So that should be a good show. A little bit off the beaten path, a little bit away from some of this political stuff that I've been doing lately, but it'll be super fun. Get to talk about sex. Probably be my most popular episode ever. All right, thanks again for listening, everybody, and stay tuned for next week. You guys have a great day.